The blood-soaked letter trembled in Penelope Owens' hands as she stood frozen on her porch, the distant silhouette of Coraville's only doctor disappearing down the dusty road. Arizona Territory, 1876, a place where dreams came to die just as readily as they came to flourish. The words blurred before her eyes. Her father dead, their ranch in debt, and her life as she knew it collapsing like a house of cards in a windstorm. Penelope folded the letter with shaking fingers, her breath catching as the movement pulled at the still healing scars across her back. The memory flashed unwelcome the fire that had consumed half their barn 6 months ago, her desperate rush to save the horses, the burning beam that had fallen. Sometimes she still woke screaming, feeling phantom flames licking at her skin. "Miss Owens," the voice startled her from her thoughts. She turned to find Sheriff Wilson, hat in hand, looking as uncomfortable as a cat in a rainstorm. "I'm sorry about your father," he said, shifting his weight. "But there's the matter of the bank loan. Mr. Peterson is asking about your intentions now that your father's passed." Penelope stiffened. "I need time to sort things out." Of course," he nodded, avoiding her eyes. "But Peterson's not a patient man. You've got 2 weeks before he'll start proceedings. 2 weeks to save a ranch that her father had spent 20 years building. 2 weeks to become the woman her father had never prepared her to be." "Thank you, Sheriff," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. After he left, Penelope sank onto the porch steps, the worn wood rough against her palms. 22 years old, alone, scarred, and now orphaned. Her mother had died of fever when Penelope was 14, and her father had raised her as best he could, teaching her to ride and shoot, but keeping her away from the business side of ranching. That had been men's work, he'd always said. The sun was setting over the distant mountains, painting the sky in fiery oranges that reminded her too much of that terrible night. Penelope shuddered and rose to her feet. There was no time for self-pity. If she was going to save this ranch, she needed help. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Penelope dressed carefully, choosing a high-necked blouse despite the summer heat. The fabric chafed against her scars, but it kept them hidden. She couldn't bear the looks of pity or worse, disgust that came when people caught glimpses of her marred skin. Main Street was bustling with the usual morning activity as she tied her horse outside the Territorial Bank. She straightened her shoulders, ignoring the pain that radiated across her back, and pushed through the door. Mr. Peterson sat behind his desk, a vulture in a tailored suit. His thin lips curved into what might have passed for a smile if it had reached his eyes. "Miss Owens, my condolences on your loss." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I've come to discuss the loan." "Indeed." He shuffled papers. "Your father borrowed quite substantially." "With his passing, the full amount is now due." Penelope swallowed. "I intend to run the ranch and repay every cent." Peterson's laugh was sharp. "A woman running the O, my dear, be reasonable. You should sell before you lose everything." "I'm not selling." Her voice was steel. "I need more time. I've already been more than generous. 2 weeks, Miss Owens, then I'll be forced to take action." Outside, Penelope blinked back furious tears. The ranch was everything, her home, her heritage, all she had left of her family. She wouldn't lose it without a fight. Whoa there. A deep voice called out just as something slammed into her, sending her sprawling into the dirt. Pain exploded across her back as she hit the ground, and she couldn't suppress a cry of agony. Through watering eyes, she saw a tall figure silhouetted against the sun. "My apologies, madam." Strong hands reached down, pulling her gently to her feet. "Didn't see you coming around that corner." Penelope found herself looking up into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face. The man wore a cowboy's clothes, trail-worn but clean, and a battered hat that had seen better days. "Are you hurt?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "I'm fine," she lied, feeling the familiar warm wetness that meant at least one of her scars had reopened. "You don't look fine." His gaze was too perceptive. "Let me help you to the doctors." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. Doctors meant removing clothing, exposing her scars. "I mean, there's no need. I just need to get home." The stranger studied her face, then nodded slowly. "At least let me help you to your horse." He walked beside her, his stride matching hers. "I'm Cole Quinn, by the way, just rode into town looking for work." "Penelope Owens." She hesitated, then added, "Of the Triple O Ranch." Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Owens." They reached her horse, and before she could protest, his hands were at her waist, lifting her effortlessly into the saddle. The movement sent another jolt of pain through her, and she couldn't hide her wince. "You sure you're all right to ride home alone?" he asked. "Quite sure, Mr. Quinn. Thank you for your assistance." As she rode away, she could feel his eyes on her back. Something about the intensity of his gaze unsettled her, as if he could somehow see through the fabric to the ruined skin beneath. By the time Penelope reached the ranch, blood had soaked through her blouse and into her jacket. She stabled her horse with shaking hands, then hurried to the house, praying none of the hands would see her in this state. In her room, she peeled off the ruined garments, hissing as dried blood pulled at tender skin. The mirror reflected what she tried so hard to forget: angry red welts crisscrossing her back, from shoulders to waist. The doctor had said she was lucky to be alive. Some days she wasn't sure she felt lucky at all. Cleaning the reopened wounds was an exercise in agony, but she managed, biting her lip until it too bled. Fresh bandages, a clean blouse, and she was presentable again, her shame once more hidden from the world. A knock at the front door startled her. Visitors were rare at the Triple O, especially now with her father gone. She opened the door to find Cole Quinn standing on her porch, hat in hand. "Mr. Quinn," confusion colored her voice. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for work, like I said." His smile was disarming. Heard at the saloon that the Triple O might be hiring. Penelope hesitated. She desperately needed help with the ranch, but hiring a stranger seemed risky. Yet there was something reassuring about his straightforward gaze. "What experience do you have?" she asked. 10 years working cattle from Texas to Montana. Can break horses, mend fences, and handle a branding iron better than most. I've been trail boss on 3 cattle drives." It sounded impressive, if true. "Why leave your last position?" A shadow passed over his face. "Time for a change of scenery." There was more to that story, but Penelope had secrets of her own. Who was she to judge? "I can't pay much," she admitted. "The ranch is struggling since my father passed." "I heard about that. My condolences." His voice held genuine sympathy. "I'm not asking for much. Fair wage for fair work is all." Penelope studied him. Tall, strong, capable looking. The kind of man her father would have hired in an instant, and she was desperate. "All right, Mr. Quinn, you can start tomorrow. The bunkhouse is behind the barn. The foreman, Jake Miller, will show you the ropes." Relief flooded his features. "You won't regret this, Miss Owens." As he walked away, Penelope wondered if she already did. The next morning brought chaos. 2 of her most experienced hands had quit overnight, leaving only Jake and 3 others to manage hundreds of cattle. When Penelope confronted Jake, his answer was blunt. "They don't want to work for a woman, Miss Penelope, especially not one whose ranch might be seized any day now." She swallowed her hurt. "Then we'll manage without them." "With all due respect, we can't, not with the summer roundup coming. We have a new hand starting today, Cole Quinn." Jake's eyebrows rose. "One man won't replace 2 good hands." "Then hire more." Penelope turned away, determined not to let him see her desperation. Nobody's looking to sign on with the Triple O right now. Words out about the bank loan. Bad news traveled fast in small towns. Penelope fought the urge to scream in frustration. "We'll make do, we have to." Cole arrived as the sun cleared the eastern hills, already mounted on a handsome buckskin gelding. Jake took him to work on the north pasture fence, and Penelope retreated to her father's study to confront the ledgers. The numbers were worse than she'd feared. Without the summer cattle sale, they'd lose everything. But getting the herd to market in Santa Fe required men she didn't have and money she couldn't spare. By evening, her eyes burned from poring over columns of figures that refused to add up to salvation. She heard the men returning, their voices carrying on the still air. Curious despite herself, she moved to the window. Cole was laughing at something Jake had said, his face transformed by genuine mirth. He dismounted with fluid grace, the movement of a man comfortable in his own skin. There was something magnetic about him, a quiet confidence that drew the eye. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up toward the house. Penelope stepped back quickly, a flush heating her cheeks at being caught staring. The next few days fell into a pattern. Penelope struggled with the business side of ranching while trying to help where she could with the physical work. Cole proved himself capable and hardworking, often taking on the tasks of two men without complaint. She found herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice, intrigued despite her determination to keep her distance. On the fourth day, disaster struck. One of the younger hands, Tommy, came galloping into the yard, his horse lathered and his face pale with panic. Miss Owens. The creek's flooding. The lower pasture herd is trapped. Penelope's blood ran cold. The lower pasture held nearly a third of their cattle, the best of the breeding stock. If they lost those animals, the ranch would never recover. Jake, she called, already running for the stable. Saddle everyone up. They rode hard for the lower pasture, Penelope ignoring the pain as her horse's movement aggravated her injuries. When they crested the rise overlooking the creek, her heart sank. What was normally a gentle stream had become a raging torrent, and dozens of cattle were stranded on what had become an island in the middle, the water rising steadily around them. "We need to get them moving to higher ground," Jake shouted over the roar of the water. "The current's too strong." Tommy protested. "We'll lose half of them trying to swim them across." Cole rode up beside Penelope, his expression grim but determined. "There's a narrower point about a quarter-mile upstream. We might be able to fell some trees, make a bridge of sorts." "That'll take too long," Penelope said, watching the water inch higher. "Those cattle will be swept away before we're halfway done." "Then we'll have to swim them out a few at a time," Cole decided. "I'll go first, show them the way." Before anyone could object, he urged his horse into the swollen creek. The buckskin fought the current bravely, and Cole guided it with expert hands. They reached the island, and Cole immediately began separating a small group of cattle from the herd. "He's got the right idea," Jake said. "Tommy, you and Liam stay on this side to receive the cattle. Miss Penelope, you should head back to the house." "I'm staying," she said firmly. "Those are my cattle." Jake looked like he wanted to argue but nodded reluctantly. "Stay on this bank then, we can't risk you in that water." For the next 2 hours, they worked frantically to save the herd. Cole and Jake swam back and forth across the dangerous water, leading small groups of frightened cattle to safety. The younger hands helped drive the rescued animals to higher ground, while Penelope kept count and coordinated their efforts. The water continued to rise. What had been an island was now barely a sandbar. Only 12 cattle remained, including Monarch, their prize bull worth more than all the others combined. "We need to get Monarch," Penelope called to Cole as he emerged dripping from the creek after his last crossing. "He's the future of our herd." Cole's horse was trembling with exhaustion. Without hesitation, Penelope urged her own mount forward. "Miss Owens, no," Jake shouted. But she was already in the water, her horse swimming strongly against the current. She reached the sandbar and dismounted, approaching Monarch carefully. The massive bull eyed her warily. "Easy, boy," she murmured. "Let's get you home." She managed to get a rope around his neck, but as she turned to lead him to her horse, the edge of the sandbar collapsed beneath her feet. Suddenly, she was in the water, the powerful current dragging her downstream. Panic seized her as water filled her nose and mouth. Her soaked clothes weighed her down, and the pain from her scarred back made it difficult to swim. The world narrowed to the desperate struggle for air, for life. Then strong arms were around her waist, pulling her up until her head broke the surface. She gasped, coughing violently as Cole Quinn held her against his chest, swimming one arm toward the shore. "I've got you," he said, his voice strained with effort. "Just breathe." They reached the bank, where Jake and the others pulled them to safety. Penelope collapsed onto the grass, shaking uncontrollably as Cole knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Monarch," she gasped. The bull's fine." "Jake got him out while I went after you." Cole's hand touched her face gently, brushing wet hair from her eyes. "You could have drowned." "The ranch needs that bull," she said weakly. Something flickered in Cole's eyes, respect, perhaps, or understanding. "Let's get you home before you catch your death." As they rode back to the ranch, the rain that had caused the flooding finally stopped, and weak sunshine broke through the clouds. Penelope was achingly aware of Cole riding close beside her, watching her as if afraid she might collapse at any moment. At the house, she dismounted carefully, her sodden clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. As she turned to thank Cole, a wave of dizziness swept over her. She swayed, and he was there instantly, strong arms supporting her. "Inside," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "You need dry clothes and a fire." Too exhausted to protest, she let him help her to the porch. When they reached the door, she tried to pull away. "I can manage from here, Mr. Quinn." But as she stepped forward, her legs gave way. Cole caught her, sweeping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "Clearly you can't," he said, carrying her inside and kicking the door shut behind them. He set her gently on a chair by the fireplace and quickly built up the fire, his movements efficient. The warmth was heavenly, but Penelope was suddenly conscious of her appearance soaking wet, her high-necked blouse now transparent enough to reveal the edges of bandages beneath. She crossed her arms over her chest, but Cole wasn't looking at her. He was searching the kitchen. "Do you have any whiskey?" he called. "Cabinet above the stove," she answered, teeth chattering. He returned with a glass of amber liquid. "Drink this. It'll warm you from the inside." The whiskey burned a path down her throat, but the warmth that spread through her was worth it. Cole crouched before her, his own clothes still dripping onto the wooden floor. "You need to get out of those wet things," he said matter-of-factly. "I'll step outside while you change." Panic flared in Penelope's chest. The wet clothes were plastered to her back, and she'd never be able to remove them herself without reopening her wounds. But the alternative was unthinkable, letting this man see her scars, her shame. Her voice faltered. "I might need some help." Cole's expression remained carefully neutral. "I can fetch one of the women from town. There's no time." Already she could feel the familiar burning that meant her wounds were worsening. "But there's something you should know." His eyes were steady on hers, patient and without judgment. "I was in a fire," she said quietly. 6 months ago, my back, it's not pretty." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "The barn fire, I heard about it in town." Of course he had. In places like Coraville, such stories were currency. "I can help you," he said gently, "or I can leave." "Your choice, Miss Owens." Penelope took a deep breath. What choice did she really have? "Stay, please." Cole nodded once, then moved behind her chair. With careful fingers, he began undoing the tiny buttons at her collar. Penelope stared straight ahead, mortification heating her cheeks despite her chill. "The bandages are soaked through," he said softly. "They'll need changing." "There are fresh ones in my bedroom, first door at the top of the stairs." While he was gone, Penelope managed to remove her boots and stockings, her fingers clumsy with cold. She had just started on her skirt when Cole returned with bandages, clean towels, and a flannel nightgown. "I found this hanging on the door," he said, placing the nightgown on the chair beside her. "Let me help you with the blouse first." His touch was impersonal, clinical almost, as he eased the sodden fabric away from her skin. Penelope bit her lip hard as the material stuck to her wounds. "I'm sorry," he murmured when she couldn't suppress a gasp of pain. "Almost done." When the blouse finally came free, leaving her in just her camisole and skirt, she heard his sharp intake of breath. The bandages beneath were stained with both old and fresh blood, the pattern of her scars visible through the wet fabric. "The doctor in town did his best," she said, her voice small. "But he's more used to setting broken bones than treating burns." Cole said nothing for a long moment, then his voice tight with some emotion she couldn't identify. "We need to get these bandages off. It's going to hurt." It did hurt, a white, hot agony that brought tears to her eyes as he carefully peeled away the sodden bandages. Penelope gripped the arms of the chair, determined not to cry out. When the last bandage came away, the cool air on her exposed back made her shiver. She waited for the inevitable sound of disgust, the quick step back that everyone took when they saw the full extent of her injuries. Instead, Cole's fingers lightly traced the edge of one scar, so gently she barely felt it. "You walked into a burning building to save your horses," he said, his voice low. "That's the story I heard." Penelope nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "They said you got everyone out, hands and horses, both before the beam fell." "Not everyone," she whispered. "We lost Storm. He was my father's favorite stallion." Cole's hand moved to her shoulder, warm and steady. "You could have died. Sometimes I think it might have been better if I had." The words slipped out before she could stop them, his grip tightened slightly. Don't say that, not ever. There was such fierceness in his tone that Penelope turned her head, trying to see his face. The movement sent pain lancing across her back, and she couldn't suppress a gasp. Let me clean these wounds properly, Cole said, his voice gentler now. Then we'll get you warm and dry. He worked with surprising skill, cleaning each laceration with a care few doctors had shown her. His touch was sure but tender, and though it hurt, Penelope found herself relaxing slightly under his ministrations. You've done this before, she observed. Army medic taught me during the war, he replied. Useful skill on the trail, too. Cowboys aren't known for avoiding injury. As he applied fresh bandages, Penelope felt a strange sense of comfort in his presence. It had been so long since anyone had cared for her this way, not since her mother died, really. Her father had loved her, but he'd never known what to do with a daughter's hurts, physical or otherwise. There, Cole said finally. That should hold. Can you manage the rest on your own? Yes, Penelope said, suddenly shy again. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Cole, he corrected, moving to face her. His eyes, so blue and direct, held no pity, only a warm respect that made her breath catch. After all this, I think we can dispense with formalities, Miss Owens. Penelope, she offered in return. His smile transformed his face, creating crinkles at the corners of his eyes. Penelope, he repeated, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. I'll wait outside while you finish changing. Call if you need anything. When he'd gone, Penelope changed into the nightgown as quickly as her injuries allowed, then wrapped herself in the quilt from the back of the sofa. You can come back in, she called. Cole entered, having somehow found time to change into dry clothes himself. He carried 2 mugs of something steaming. Made coffee, he said, handing her one. Figured we could both use it. They sat in companionable silence before the fire, the only sounds the crackling of flames and the occasional distant lowing of cattle. Penelope studied Cole over the rim of her mug. In the firelight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the sun, the small scar that bisected one eyebrow, the strong, capable hands that had been so gentle with her wounds. Why did you really come to the Triple O? She asked suddenly. Cole's eyes met hers, unreadable. I told you looking for work. There are bigger ranches with steadier pay. The Double X is hiring and they're not on the verge of bankruptcy. He took a slow sip of coffee before answering. I've worked for operations like the Double X. Big outfits where men are just tools, not people. Heard the Triple O was different. A pause. Your father had a reputation for fairness. Penelope felt the familiar ache at the mention of her father. He was a good man. From what I've seen, his daughter takes after him. The compliment warmed her more than the fire. You barely know me. I know you risked your life to save your animals, twice now. His gaze was intent. I know you're fighting to save this ranch when most would have sold and moved on. I know you treat your hands with respect, not like servants. Put that way, it sounded almost noble. Penelope looked down at her coffee, uncomfortable with his praise. The Triple O is all I have left of my family. I can't lose it. You won't, Cole said with such conviction that she almost believed him. We saved the herd today, that's a start. A small one. The bank still wants its money in 10 days. Cole leaned forward, elbows on knees. How much do you need? Penelope named a figure that made her stomach clench with anxiety every time she thought of it. He whistled softly. That's a fair sum, but not impossible. It is when no one will buy cattle from a woman, and the best hands in the territory are leaving for more promising ranches. Bitterness crept into her voice. Mr. Peterson at the bank has made it clear what he thinks of my chances. Peterson. Cole's expression darkened. I've met his type before. Men who think money gives them the right to decide others' fates. He's already talking to the Double X about selling them our land once the bank forecloses. Penelope hadn't meant to share that particular piece of information, but something about Cole made it easy to speak freely. Is that so? Cole's voice was dangerously soft. Well, Mr. Peterson might find his plans interrupted. How? The roundup's still a week away and we're short-handed. Even if we could get the cattle to market in time, the prices might not be high enough. Then we'll find another way. Cole's confidence was oddly reassuring. I didn't come to the Triple O to watch it fall. Penelope studied him, trying to understand this man who seemed determined to fight for a ranch that wasn't his. Why do you care so much? For the first time, Cole looked away, staring into the fire. Let's just say I know what it's like to lose everything you care about. Wouldn't wish that on anyone. He stood abruptly. You should rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. As he reached the door, Penelope called after him. Cole, thank you for the river and for this. She gestured vaguely at her bandaged back. He paused, hand on the doorknob. Your scars, Penelope, they're nothing to be ashamed of. They tell a story of courage, not weakness. With that, he was gone, leaving Penelope staring after him, something warm unfurling in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire or the coffee. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous day's storm had never happened. Penelope woke feeling stronger than she expected, Cole's careful treatment of her wounds having prevented the infection she'd feared. She dressed carefully, choosing a blouse that wouldn't irritate her back, and headed downstairs to find Cole and Jake already at the kitchen table, deep in conversation over coffee and maps. Morning, she said, trying to ignore the way Cole's eyes lingered on her face. How are you feeling? He asked, the concern in his voice making Jake look between them curiously. Better, thank you. She poured herself coffee and joined them at the table. What are you planning? Jake pushed the map toward her. Cole has an idea about getting the herd to market early. Early, Penelope frowned. The cattle aren't ready. Not all of them, Cole agreed, but the steers in the north pasture are. There's about 100 head there that could fetch decent prices now. But Santa Fe's buyer doesn't arrive for another 3 weeks. Cole's smile held a hint of mischief. Who said anything about Santa Fe? There's a new railroad spur being built out of Tuxen. They're bringing in workers by the hundreds, all of whom need feeding. Penelope's pulse quickened. Tuxen's half the distance of Santa Fe. Exactly. We could have those steers there in a week, maybe less with a good crew. Which we don't have, Jake pointed out. We're 4 men short of a proper drive team. Cole tapped the map. I know some men in Dry Creek who'd sign on for a quick job. Good hands, trustworthy. Penelope studied the route he'd marked. It was risky crossing rougher terrain than the Santa Fe trail, but in half the time. If they could get those steers to market before Peterson's deadline. How soon could your men be here? She asked. 2 days if I leave today. And the prices in Tuxen, higher than Santa Fe, Cole said confidently. Railroad crews pay premium for fresh beef. Penelope looked to Jake, who nodded slowly. It could work. Won't solve all our problems, but it would buy us time with the bank. Decision made, Penelope nodded. Do it. Bring your men and we'll drive those steers to Tuxen. Cole's grin was worth any risk. I'll leave within the hour. After he'd gone, Jake lingered, an odd expression on his weathered face. Something on your mind, Jake? Penelope asked. That Quinn fellow. He hesitated. He seems mighty invested in saving the Triple O. He's a good man who wants to keep his job, Penelope replied, though she'd had similar thoughts. Maybe. Jake wasn't convinced. Just seems strange is all. He shows up right when we need help most, already knowing all about our troubles. People talk. He probably heard about Father's death in town. Probably. Jake nodded, but his expression remained doubtful. Just be careful, Miss Penelope. Your father trusted too easily sometimes. The warning lingered in Penelope's mind as she went about her chores. Was Cole Quinn too good to be true? A handsome cowboy appearing at her darkest hour, determined to save her ranch. It sounded like something from a dime novel. Yet there had been nothing false in his careful treatment of her wounds, nothing calculating in the respect with which he'd regarded her scars. Whatever his reasons for helping, she couldn't believe they were entirely self-serving. Cole returned 2 days later with 5 hard-looking men who nonetheless treated Penelope with polite deference. They set about preparing for the cattle drive immediately, checking equipment, preparing chuck wagons, and riding out to assess the herd. The night before they were to leave, Penelope found Cole alone by the corral, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Your men seem capable, she said, coming to stand beside him. Best in the territory, he agreed. We'll get your cattle to market, Penelope, I promise you that. Something in his tone made her turn to study his profile. This isn't just about the cattle, is it? Cole was silent for a long moment. No, he finally admitted. It's not. Then what? He turned to face her fully, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. Your father saved my life once. Did he ever mention a young cowhand who got caught in a flash flood about 10 years back? Penelope's eyes widened. You're that boy. Father talked about you, sometimes said you were the most promising young rider he'd ever seen. Cole nodded. I was 16, stupid, thought I knew everything. Got caught trying to cross a wash during the rainy season. Your father pulled me out, gave me a job when no one else would take a chance on a half-drowned kid with no experience. I remember now, Penelope said softly. You worked here for a summer, then you left for Texas, Cole finished, got restless, thought bigger opportunities were waiting elsewhere. His laugh held no humor. Been regretting that decision ever since. So when you heard about Father's death, I knew I had to come back, try to repay the debt. His eyes held hers. I owe him my life, Penelope. Helping you save this ranch is the least I can do. The honesty in his voice touched something deep inside her. Thank you for telling me. Cole's hand reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The simple touch sent warmth cascading through her. There's something else you should know, he said, his voice dropping lower. Something that might make you trust me less, not more. Penelope's heart quickened. What is it? But before he could answer, Jake's voice called from the bunkhouse, summoning Cole to settle a dispute among the men. Cole's hand fell away from her face. It'll keep, he said, regret clear in his voice. We should both get some rest. Dawn comes early. As Penelope watched him walk away, she wondered what confession had been on his lips, and why the thought of it filled her with both dread and anticipation. The cattle drive began at first light, the steers reluctant to leave their familiar pasture, but eventually moving under the experienced guidance of Cole's men. Penelope rode alongside Cole at the head of the herd, determined to be part of this effort to save her ranch. You should have stayed behind, Cole said as they settled into the slow rhythm of the drive. Your back is healing, she finished firmly. These are my cattle, my responsibility. He studied her face, then nodded. Your father would be proud. The words meant more to Penelope than he could know. Her entire life, she'd sought her father's approval, always feeling she fell short because she wasn't the son he'd wanted. To hear Cole, who had known her father, who understood ranching, say those words filled a hollow place inside her. The first 2 days passed without incident. The cattle moved well, the weather held, and Cole's men proved as skilled as promised. Penelope found herself watching Cole as he worked the easy way he sat a horse, the quiet authority with which he gave orders, the genuine care he showed for both animals and men. On the third night, as they camped in a sheltered valley, Cole joined her by the fire after the others had turned in. The night was cool, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. How's your back holding up? He asked, offering her a cup of coffee. Better than I expected, she admitted, though I'll be glad for a real bed when this is over. Cole smiled, the firelight casting his features in warm gold. 3 more days if the weather holds, then you'll have enough money to keep Peterson at bay. Thanks to you, Penelope met his eyes. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. The words came from someplace deep and true. My ranch, my livelihood, maybe even my life after that river. Cole's expression grew serious. There's something I need to tell you, Penelope, something I should have said before we left. There it was again, that confession he'd almost made by the corral. Penelope's stomach tightened with apprehension. What is it? He took a deep breath. I know Thomas Peterson, not just know him personally. The banker, confusion colored her voice. How? We served together in the war, same regiment for 2 years. Cole's face was grim in the firelight. He wasn't a banker then, of course, just a scared kid like the rest of us. But even then, he had a mean streak, enjoyed having power over others. Penelope tried to process this information. What does that have to do with the Triple O? Cole's eyes met hers directly. After your father died, Peterson wrote to me, said there was a ranch coming available cheap if I was interested in a partnership. The blood drained from Penelope's face. He offered you my ranch. Before it was even foreclosed, Cole nodded, his expression pained. He remembered I'd worked for your father briefly, thought I might want revenge for being dismissed, that's how he put it. But father didn't dismiss you, you chose to leave. Peterson doesn't understand choices that aren't about money or power. Cole's voice hardened. He assumes everyone thinks like him. Penelope stood abruptly, needing space, air. The implications were staggering. So you came to the 0002. What? Assess its value before buying it out from under me. No, Cole rose too, his face anguished. I came because I was furious that he'd try to steal your father's legacy. I came to help, not to harm. Why should I believe you? Hurt made her voice sharp. You've been lying since the day we met. Not lying, he protested. Just not telling the whole truth. That's lying by omission, Mr. Quinn. She deliberately used his surname, needing the distance. How do I know this cattle drive isn't part of some plan with Peterson? Get me away from the ranch so he can seize it while I'm gone. Because I would never do that to you. The raw honesty in his voice made her pause. Yes, I should have told you about Peterson's letter immediately. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. But everything else helping with the ranch, treating your wounds, organizing this drive that was real, Penelope. I swear it, she wanted to believe him. God help her, she wanted to trust the sincerity in those blue eyes, the warmth in that voice. But her father had trusted people too, and look where that had left her, fighting to save everything she loved. I need time to think, she said finally. Please leave me alone. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment he nodded and walked away, shoulders slumped in defeat. Penelope barely slept that night, her mind churning with questions. If Cole was working with Peterson, why organize a cattle drive that would help her pay the loan? Why treat her wounds with such care? Why confess it all by morning? She had no answers, only a hollow ache in her chest when Cole greeted her with formal politeness instead of his usual warm smile. They rode in silence as the herd moved steadily westward. The terrain grew rougher, rocky outcroppings replacing the gentle grasslands of the 00. By midday, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Storm coming, Jake observed, riding up beside Penelope. Might need to find shelter. Cole, overhearing, shook his head. No good shelter for miles, we'll have to push through. The first fat raindrops began to fall as the herd entered a narrow canyon. Penelope pulled her slicker tighter around her shoulders, grimacing as it rubbed against her healing wounds. The cattle grew restless, sensing the approaching storm. Then lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that echoed off the canyon walls. The effect on the herd was instantaneous. What had been unease transformed into panic. The lead steers balked, then wheeled, and suddenly the entire herd was turning, ready to stampede back the way they'd come. Head him off, Cole shouted, spurring his horse toward the front of the herd. Penelope and the others followed, racing to get ahead of the panicking cattle. Rain lashed at her face as Penelope urged her horse faster, desperate to help turn the stampede before the animals hurt themselves or worse, the drovers. Lightning struck again, this time hitting a tree at the canyon's edge. The explosive crack sent the cattle into a frenzy. Penelope found herself in the midst of the stampede, surrounded by massive bodies and deadly hooves. Her horse, well-trained but terrified, reared suddenly. Penelope felt herself falling, the world tilting crazily around her. Then impact the hard ground, knocking the breath from her lungs, pain exploding across her back. She rolled instinctively, trying to get away from the thundering hooves, but her foot caught in a crevice between rocks. Trapped, she could only watch in horror as the stampeding cattle bore down on her. Death seemed certain until a horse and rider appeared between her and the oncoming herd, the rider standing in his stirrups, waving his hat and shouting, "Cole." He was trying to turn the lead steers, putting himself between her and certain death. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed impossible that he would succeed. Then, miraculously, the lead steer veered, and the ones behind followed. The herd split around the obstacle Cole presented, thundering past on either side but missing Penelope by precious feet. When the last animal had passed, Cole was off his horse in an instant, kneeling beside her in the mud. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over her, checking for injuries, his face white with fear. Penelope tried to speak, but no words came. The reality of what he'd just risked for her was overwhelming. No man working with Peterson would have gambled his life that way. "My ankle," she finally managed. "I think it's stuck." Cole worked quickly, freeing her foot from the rocky crevice. "Can you stand?" With his help, Penelope got to her feet, wincing as she put weight on her ankle. Just twisted, I think. Not broken. Relief washed over Cole's face. Then, without warning, he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart hammering against her chest. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured into her hair. Penelope melted into his embrace, all doubts swept away by the undeniable truth of his actions. A man revealed his true self not in words but in moments of crisis, and Cole Quinn had just shown her exactly who he was. "You saved my life," she said, drawing back enough to see his face. Rain streamed down his features, plastering his hair to his forehead. "Why, after how I treated you last night, because I love you." The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. "God help me, Penelope, I've loved you since I pulled you from that river." Time seemed to stop. The rain, the cattle, the shouting men all faded to insignificance as Penelope stared into Cole's eyes and saw the truth written there. "You don't even know me," she whispered. His laugh was soft, disbelieving. "I know everything that matters. I know you're brave enough to face fire for those you care about. I know you're determined enough to fight for your land when everyone said you should give up. I know you hide your scars because you think they make you less, when they only prove how much more you are than most." Penelope's heart swelled with an emotion she hardly dared name. Before she could respond, Jake rode up, his expression frantic. "The herd's scattered half to hell," he called. "We need to round them up before they disperse too far." The moment broken, Cole helped Penelope onto his horse. "Can you ride? We need every hand if we're going to salvage this drive." "I can ride," she assured him, though her ankle throbbed painfully. Some things were more important than comfort, like saving her ranch, and perhaps her heart. For hours they worked in the driving rain, gathering the scattered cattle, counting losses, treating injuries. By nightfall, they had recovered most of the herd enough to continue to Tuxen, though their profits would be less than hoped. They made camp in the shelter of a rock outcropping, everyone too exhausted for much talk. Penelope sat by the small fire, her wet clothes steaming slightly, her ankle propped on her saddle. Cole brought her a plate of beans and bacon, then sat beside her, his shoulder barely touching hers. "How bad is it?" she asked, meaning the cattle. "We lost 12 head, 2 men with minor injuries." His voice was tired but steady. "We can still make Tuxen in 2 days if the weather clears. And if it doesn't, then we push through anyway." His determination was unwavering. "I made you a promise, Penelope. I intend to keep it." She studied his profile in the firelight, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the eyes that had looked into hers and declared love with such simple certainty. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked softly. Before Jake interrupted, Cole turned to face her fully, every word. Penelope's hand found his, fingers intertwining. "I don't know if what I feel is love yet," she admitted, "but it's something I've never felt before, something that scares me and thrills me all at once." His smile was slow, warming her more effectively than the fire. "That sounds like a good place to start." With gentle fingers, he brushed a strand of damp hair from her face. "May I kiss you, Penelope Owens?" In answer, she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deeper as he pulled her closer. His hand cradled her face as if she were something precious, something to be cherished. When they finally parted, both breathless, Penelope saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt that here, in the most unlikely of circumstances, they had found something rare and valuable. "Whatever happens with the ranch," she whispered, "I'm glad you came back to the O. "So am I," he murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. "So am I." The weather cleared overnight, and they reached Tuxen 2 days later, driving the cattle into the stockyards under a cloudless sky. As Cole had predicted, the railroad contractors were eager for fresh beef, and the price they offered exceeded Penelope's most optimistic expectations. With the bank draft safely tucked away, Penelope and Cole rode back toward the O, leaving Jake to bring the men and equipment at a more leisurely pace. They traveled quickly, aware that Peterson's deadline was mere days away. On their last night on the trail, camped beside a small stream, Cole built a fire while Penelope prepared a simple meal. The domesticity of it felt right somehow, as if they'd been partners for years rather than weeks. As they ate, Cole spoke of his plans for the future, improving the Triple O's breeding stock, expanding the grazing land, building new corrals. It was clear he saw himself as part of that future, and Penelope found the prospect filled her with joy rather than apprehension. "What will you say to Peterson?" he asked as they finished their coffee. Penelope smiled, a touch of mischief in her expression. "I thought I'd let you be there when I pay him. See his face when he realizes his scheme failed." Cole's laugh was rich and full. "I'd like that very much." Later, as they lay side by side beneath the stars, Cole's arm a warm weight around her shoulders, Penelope found herself thinking of the strange twists of fate that had brought them together: her father's death, the barn fire, Peterson's greed. From such painful beginnings, something beautiful had emerged. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "How sometimes the worst things lead to the best things," she replied. "If I hadn't been scarred in that fire, you might never have seen the real me." Cole shifted to look at her, his face serious in the moonlight. "Your scars are part of you, but they're not what make you beautiful to me." Penelope's breath caught. No one had called her beautiful since the fire. "What does then?" His fingers traced the line of her jaw. "Your courage. Your determination, the way you fight for what matters to you." His voice deepened. "The way you look at me sometimes like I'm something precious." "You are," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "More precious than I ever expected to find." Their kiss was tender, a promise of all that might be. When Cole finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with emotion. "Marry me," he said simply. Penelope stared at him, stunned by the suddenness of it. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," he insisted. "I know I want to build a life with you, to help make the Triple O everything your father dreamed it could be." His smile was tender. "I know I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night." Joy bubbled up inside her, effervescent and sweet. "Yes," she said, the word feeling right on her tongue. "Yes, I'll marry you, Cole Quinn." His whoop of delight startled a nearby owl from its perch, sending it flapping indignantly into the night sky. Penelope laughed as Cole gathered her close, his happiness as tangible as the arms around her. They reached Coraville the next afternoon, riding straight to the territorial bank. Peterson looked up from his desk, his expression changing from professional welcome to dismay when he recognized his visitors. "Miss Owens, Mr. Quinn," his voice was stiff. "What can I do for you today?" Penelope placed the bank draft on his desk. "I've come to pay my father's loan, in full." Peterson stared at the draft, then at Cole, his face reddening. "I see. Well, this is unexpected, is it?" Cole's smile held no warmth. "Strange. You seemed very certain the Triple O would be available for purchase soon, certain enough to write to me about it." Peterson's eyes darted between them. "A simple business proposition, nothing improper about that. Except that you offered to sell him my ranch before it was legally foreclosed," Penelope pointed out. "I wonder what the bank's directors would think of that." "Are you threatening me, Miss Owens?" Peterson's voice was tight with anger. "Not at all." Penelope's smile was sweet. "I'm simply paying my debt and informing you that any future business of mine will be conducted with the bank in Tuxen." She rose, offering her hand to Cole. "Shall we, Mr. Quinn? We have a wedding to plan." Outside, Cole lifted her into a spontaneous embrace, spinning her around on the sidewalk as she laughed in delight. "Have I told you today how much I admire you, Penelope Owens?" he asked, setting her back on her feet. "Not in the last hour," she teased. "Well, I do, tremendously." His expression grew serious. "Your father would be so proud of what you've accomplished." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "I think he would have liked you, especially now that you're staying. Wild horses couldn't drag me away." Cole took her hand, tucking it into the crook of his arm as they walked toward their waiting horses. "Speaking of horses, I was thinking we might restart your father's breeding program. That Colt of Storms shows promise." As they rode back to the Triple O, Penelope felt a sense of homecoming deeper than any she'd known before. The land stretched around them, golden in the late afternoon sun, her land, her heritage, now secure for the future. And beside her rode the man who had helped make it possible, who had seen her scars and found in them not weakness but strength. They were married a month later, a simple ceremony in the Triple O's front yard with Jake giving away the bride, and the ranch hands serving as witnesses. Penelope wore her mother's dress, altered to cover her scars but beautiful nonetheless. Cole's eyes, when he saw her, told her everything she needed to know about how he saw her not as damaged, but as perfect in her imperfection. That night, as she stood in their bedroom, her father's room, now theirs, Penelope felt a moment of panic. Cole had seen her scars, yes, but always in the context of injury, of needing treatment. This was different. He sensed her apprehension, approaching slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said softly. Penelope shook her head. "It's not that, it's—" She gestured helplessly at her back. "They're ugly. I don't want you to be disappointed." Understanding dawned in Cole's eyes. With deliberate movements, he unbuttoned his shirt, slipping it off to reveal his chest and torso. Penelope gasped softly. A long, jagged scar ran from his left shoulder across his ribs, a wound that should have been fatal. "Shiloh," he said quietly, "Confederate saber. The medic who saved me said I should have died." Penelope's fingers reached out, tracing the raised line of the scar. "You never mentioned this, because it's part of me, not something that defines me." He took her hand, pressing it flat against his chest so she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "Just like your scars are part of you, not definitions of who you are." Slowly, giving her every chance to stop him, Cole turned her around and began unfastening the buttons of her nightdress. Penelope stood trembling, not from fear but from the intensity of her emotions as the fabric slipped from her shoulders, exposing her scarred back to her husband's gaze. She felt his fingers first, then his lips, as he traced each mark with infinite tenderness. "Beautiful," he murmured against her skin. "So beautiful." Tears slipped down Penelope's cheeks, not tears of shame or sorrow, but of release. All the pain, all the hiding, all the fear that no one would ever see past her scars to the woman beneath all of it washed away in the gentle touch of this man who loved her exactly as she was. When Cole turned her to face him, his own eyes were damp. "Your scars," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "they don't make you broken, Penelope. They make you strong. They're proof that you survived, that you fought, that you didn't give up." His hand cupped her cheek. "They're part of why I love you." In that moment, the last walls around Penelope's heart crumbled. She reached for her husband, unafraid at last to be seen, to be known, to be loved completely. "I love you, Cole Quinn," she whispered against his lips, "with everything I am." His smile was radiant as he lifted her into his arms and carried her to their bed. "And I love everything you are, Penelope Quinn, scars and all." 5 years later, Penelope stood on the porch of the Triple O's main house, watching as Cole taught their 3-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, to sit a pony. The little girl's laughter carried on the summer breeze, as bright and joyful as the wildflowers dotting the pasture. The Triple O had flourished under their joint care. The breeding program Cole had re-established was producing some of the finest horses in the territory. Their cattle operation had expanded, with 3 successful drives to market each year. The bunkhouse had been enlarged twice to accommodate the growing number of hands needed to work the spreading operation. Penelope's hand drifted to her rounded belly, where their second child grew strong and active. Another 2 months, and Elizabeth would have a little brother or sister to dote on. Cole looked up, catching her watching them. His smile, even after 5 years of marriage, still made her heart skip a beat. He lifted Elizabeth from the pony and whispered something in her ear that made the little girl giggle and nod enthusiastically. Together, father and daughter walked toward the house, Elizabeth skipping beside Cole with her hand firmly in his. "Mama," she called as they approached. "Papa says I'm the best rider in Arizona. Did he now?" Penelope crouched carefully to her daughter's level. "Well, your papa knows a thing or two about good riders, so he must be right." Elizabeth beamed, then her face grew serious. "Mama, Papa showed me his war scar. He says it makes him strong, not broken." Her little brow furrowed. "Do you have scars too?" Penelope's eyes met Cole's over their daughter's head. In them, she saw nothing but love and support for whatever she chose to say. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "I do have scars from a fire long before you were born." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "Can I see them?" Once such a request would have filled Penelope with shame and panic. Now she simply turned, lifting the back of her blouse just enough to show a small portion of the scarred skin. Elizabeth's small fingers touched the raised tissue with innocent curiosity. Did it hurt? Yes, it did. Penelope turned back to her daughter. But they don't hurt anymore. Papa says scars tell stories. Elizabeth looked up with solemn eyes. What story do yours tell? Penelope smiled, drawing her daughter into a gentle embrace. They tell the story of how I learned to be brave. How I saved some horses from a fire and got hurt doing it. She looked up at Cole, who was watching them with such tenderness it made her throat tight. And they tell the story of how I met your papa, who taught me that sometimes the things we think make us broken are actually the things that make us strong. Elizabeth seemed to consider this, then nodded with the profound wisdom of childhood. I like that story. So do I, Cole said, reaching down to help Penelope to her feet. His hand lingered on hers, warm and familiar. It's my favorite story in the world. As they walked into the house together, Penelope thought about the strange and wonderful path that had led her here to this man, this child, this life. The scars on her back had once seemed like the end of everything good. Instead, they had been the beginning. In Cole's eyes, she had found not just acceptance but celebration of every part of her, the strength and the vulnerability, the courage and the fear, the visible scars and the invisible ones. He had taught her that true love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who saw your imperfections as essential parts of your beauty. And in teaching her that truth, he had healed wounds far deeper than those left by fire. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Cole's hand gentle on her pregnant belly, Penelope whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" he asked, his voice drowsy with approaching sleep. "For seeing me," she said simply. "All of me when I couldn't see myself." Cole drew her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That's what love is, Penelope, seeing each other's scars, flaws, fears, and all, and choosing each other anyway, every day." "Every day," she echoed, the words a promise as she drifted to sleep in the arms of the man who had taught her that her scars made her strong, not broken, and who loved her all the more because of them.